and welcome to SMA NewsHour. Today, we will be taking a look at the financial crisis of 2008. The United States economy faced its most dangerous crisis since the Great Depression. Thousands lost their jobs, major companies went bankrupt, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average lost over a third of its value. Let's take a look back at how this crisis began. The 90s saw a rapidly growing U.S. economy due in part to low interest rates because of Federal Reserve policies, Clinton-era deficit cuts, and international governments and bankers, especially those in Asia, that were willing to make low-interest loans to American borrowers, especially if these funds went into buying Asian goods. In 1999, Congress passed the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act that repealed a section of the 1933 Glass-Steagall Act, passed at the height of the Great Depression, and created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, to provide federal insurance for bank accounts, but also required banks that were not insured to not use their money in risky investments, called speculating. The act had been slowly relaxed, especially leading up to the 1990s, when it was repealed, allowing banks more investing freedom. The separation between federally insured banks, who could not speculate but were insured by the government, and investment banks, who were not insured but could and did speculate, grew ever thinner. Other developments in this period also shaped how the banks handled their funds. The first was President George W. Bush's idea of an ownership society, in which, if more people owned their homes, they would be more involved in their community. Here's an interview our researchers found in the archives of Representative Barney Frank on his opinions on how that would be accomplished.
Mr. Frank, how do you plan on accomplishing Bush's idea of an ownership society?
I plan on accomplishing this ownership society by convincing banks to allow mortgages to poor people so they can own their own homes.
What does this mean, Mr. Frank?
This means you get a home! You get a home! Everybody gets a home!
At the same time, banks found new ways to handle and profit from home mortgages. Previously, banks would issue a mortgage and hold it, but many began dividing them into small shares and then selling these shares during this period. This slicing and dicing seemed to have lower risk than individually owned mortgages. Along with lower interest rates, encouraged bankers to offer mortgages to people who they never would have before.
Sure, you can have a mortgage.
Really? But I have no down payment, and I have no documentation to prove income or my ability to pay.
That's okay. Haven't you heard? It's called subprime mortgage market.
Because more people were buying homes, house prices skyrocketed between 2001 and 2006, while interest rates stayed low and bankers made a lot of money. The average employee at the major investment bank, Goldman Sachs, made $661,000 in 2007, and its chief, Lloyd Blankfield, made $54 million that year alone. Mortgages became not only a way to finance a personal residence, but also a major investment. The practice of flipping homes, or mortgaging a home, then selling it for a higher price, and either keeping the profits or buying a more expensive home, became extremely popular. Everyone was making money, and a bubble was forming similar to the one that formed just before the Great Depression. And just like the Great Depression, that bubble was reaching capacity in 2006. When the housing bubble did reach its peak, home prices stopped rising. People who had bought homes, intending to flip them, could not sell them. Those who had bought homes with flexible interest rates, intending to refinance at a lower rate, could not find a new mortgage. More and more people began defaulting on loans. Because of this, less money was going to the banks, and they themselves began getting in trouble. Before long, it became apparent that large and supposedly stable banks, like Lehman and Goldman Sachs, were in fact in some of the most trouble. It appeared that the problem was not going to be contained to a few mortgage lenders, but would affect the entire nation. It all came to a head on September 13th and 14th, and by the end of that weekend, Lehman had declared bankruptcy, Bank of America had bought Merrill Lynch, and the American International Group was in major danger. The stock market fell by over 504.48 points. Secretary of Treasury Hank Paulson, along with other government officials, publicly tried to maintain confidence. But that was not the case privately, as you can see in this clip of Treasury Secretary Paulson speaking with his wife.
Oh, honey, this is worse than anyone predicted. What if the system collapses?
The system thankfully did not collapse, though the economy was in a place it hadn't been since the Depression. By the end of September 2008, Secretary Paulson and other congressional leaders put together Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP, to stop the continuing financial collapse. It was rejected by a vote of 228 to 225 in the House of Representatives by members of both parties, who felt it was not the government's place to use taxpayer money to bail out investors who had taken too many risks. Immediately following the vote, the Dow Jones Industrial Average lost another 777 points, the largest one-day drop to date. The crisis was spreading far beyond the banks, and a report showed 159,000 jobs had been lost that September. Finally, Congress passed TARP on October 3rd, which created a $700 billion fund to bail out the worst of the banks and stabilize the system. Congress also created a Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission in May 2009 to study the crisis. The committee found that there were a number of reasons behind the crisis, including risky bank investments and inattentive auditing companies in charge of monitoring the bank's account book. The committee also unearthed other economic problems. Lehman Brothers and other firms had been overly optimistic in their finances than the situation warranted. New York financier Bernard Madoff was arrested and charged with securities fraud for running a giant Ponzi scheme with his investment securities company. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison, and investors lost between $10 and $17 billion. After 2008, unemployment rates stayed high, close to 16% if you included part-time and discouraged workers in 2009 and 2010. Those who lost their jobs were unemployed for longer. This created a seemingly endless cycle of unemployed workers not buying as many goods, which meant less profit, which led to more unemployment, making the economy very slow-moving entering 2012. The financial crisis of 2008 was the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Hundreds of thousands of jobs were lost, and it is estimated that almost 1 year's economic output was lost between 2007 and 2009. The public opinion and trust in banks and the government as a whole went down, as many blamed their poor fortune on these entities. This has been SMA NewsHour. Thank you for watching.